Hi, I'm Bill Arnold. Thank you for listening to this podcast. There are many more podcasts available at myfaithradio.com. Your support makes this possible. Thank you.
Oh, don't you know, it's the Bill Arnold Show. It's Bill.
And a warm welcome to the Bill Arnold Show. So glad you joined me today. I'm looking forward to bringing my guest on, Dr. Jeff Zweerink, in just a minute. He's a senior research scholar at Reasons to Believe. But we're going to talk today a little bit about artificial intelligence, and I'm real curious and why I want to, start off with a 5-person survey.
Love it.
Which is, I usually don't do this right away.
No, I don't think so, yeah.
But I'm so curious if people are accessing artificial intelligence to ask about questions of faith. So in other words, faith right now in this age of technology, are you going to AI to ask AI questions about faith? So yes or no?
Yeah, easy enough. Send that over, a text message to 877-933-2484, a simple yes or no.
Yeah. Now, if you were wondering about something like, I would like to find out what verses are there on forgiveness, and you went to AI, probably it'll give you 25 quick verses about forgiveness.
In an instant.
And it's pretty helpful.
Oh, absolutely. There are definitely benefits to it.
So let's start with you. Why? Do you use AI for faith questions?
I do, but I use it for more than that too, and not in a way that's just being lazy, I guess. But I feel like what people don't realize is when you Google something, let's say nowadays, the first thing that pops up usually is AI, like an AI overview of what you just Googled. So without even realizing we're using it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does indeed. Well, my guest, Dr. Jeff Zweerink, is an astrophysicist, and he earned his PhD in astrophysics from Iowa State University, and he's the author of Escaping the Beginning, Is There Life Out There, and Who's Afraid of the Multiverse? Interesting topic. Jeff, thank you for saying yes.
I am so glad to be on your show today, Bill. Looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, I think everyone is pretty fascinated with AI. I know I am. And when it comes to learning about something quickly, I take it all with a grain of salt, but I will access AI. But I'm curious as to dig into this topic with you, Jeff, about the concept of AI as it relates to faith in this age of technology.
Yeah, I have to say, a lot of my research in academia has been driven by if computers didn't exist, the research I do wouldn't exist. And so I wouldn't say I'm kind of like right out at the forefront of computer technology, but I've been kind of not too far behind that. And so it's just been a great interest of me to think about AI and especially how my perception of what AI was formed back 20, 30, 40 years ago and what AI is now. It's just a fascinating topic all around. So,
All right, Wyatt, the results are already in. It was quick.
Yeah, it looks like, what is that, 3 no's and 2 yeses.
So people are not in favor of using AI for faith issues. That's interesting.
Yeah. Kind of split, too, though. Some are, some aren't, so.
Yeah. If you have a question about AI as it relates to faith in this age of technology, you can send it over, whether it's a question or a comment, 877-933-2484. Jeff, let's talk a little bit about your training. I know you're an astrophysicist, and talk about how that connects you to AI and your history with it.
Well, as I just mentioned a bit ago, there's just the ability to use computers and understand how they work and seeing how the technology has grown. I remember there being kind of an ironic or funny thing, it's like if cars operated like computers, they'd go 500 miles an hour, they'd make 4 circuits around the earth, and then periodically they'd just stop. You'd have to roll down the windows and roll them back up to get them to start again. So computer technology has just increased phenomenally since I first started working with computers, which would have been actually back in the late 80s. I actually got kind of introduced to it back when I was in high school, actually, even before that in the early 80s. And so watching it grow has been fascinating. And there's always been this kind of drive or desire to say, what can we get computers to do? Can we make them faster? Can we make them more powerful? Can we get them to actually do what humans do? And I remember back in the 90s, there was this competition between Gary Kasparov, who was the world's best chess player, and the machine. I think it was called Deep Blue. And, ultimately in 1997, the machine finally beat the best human chess player, and kind of has this idea is like, oh, now it's human, except it's not. And so just this ability to use computers to do the things that we do. And at what point will it ever become the sort of thing where computers are actually intelligent like we are? And so I just kind of fascinated by the rise of technology and use it quite a bit to do that. Just as an example of the research I've gotten to do, one of my early projects that I worked on was an instrument where we got data from just over 100 photomultiplier tubes, and those are light sensitive devices. But we'd get 100 of these pieces of data 10 to 50 times a second, and you just can't sit down and work through those with hand. You got to use computers to do them. And so computers have just been an integral part of my research. In fact, I taught myself how to program in C, just because without that I wouldn't be able to do the work. So it's just been a fascination of mine now for coming up on 4 decades.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk a little bit about AI, sermon generators, and some of this technology that's now available. And is it a good idea or a bad idea?
That's what I found fascinating is for the longest time as AIs, you could build an AI that would play chess. You could build an AI that would play Jeopardy. You had these AIs that could do limited things in there. And it was almost always was playing a game. I mean, they could be very interactive games like poker. They could be very straightforward rule-based games like chess. But nonetheless, as these AIs, they would call them AIs, but it's like they just kind of approached everything very differently. But yet, with the advent of these large language models, which almost all the time we're talking about AI now, when you were talking about, when you do a Google search and you get that top result is almost always an AI summary, that these are a reflection of AI has now learned how to, I'm going to say it in a little bit of a provocative way, it's kind of learned how to master language, if you will. And so now you've got this scenario where AIs can do something that is innate to human ability, the ability to talk and communicate. And I mean, I could go out and say, one of my favorite writers is A.W. Tozier. He's passed away long ago, so I don't get any of that. But I could go out and say, hey, can you write and deliver, with voice synthesizers, you could get an AI that could deliver a very inspirational message in the voice of A.W. Tozier about whatever topic I would like. And there's part of that that's fascinating because would be able to interact with this author who I think is very profound. But there's also something that seems kind of almost deeply disturbing because I'm not really interacting with the person. There's something that's supposed to be relational about that, and that's not what the AI is doing. And so it's kind of got this, ooh, neat, look what you could do, but also, ooh, wow, look what you could do. There's a positive and a negative to it, no matter how you slice it.
Mm-hmm. But Jeff, if the computers have collected everything that A.W. Tozer has said, and then you ask it to form something in his voice, even though he's not living anymore, aren't they just using information that already exists that has come from him and crafting it into a message?
That's exactly right. That's exactly what's going on. And in that sense, I think the technology is really, there's a really neat, use that word too much. It's just incredible what we can do to
Mm-hmm.
be able to use the technology to get information, accumulate information, find information that would be kind of obscure and hard to get to. But there is this other side. If it just kind of wrote it down so that I could read it and talk, or read it and digest it myself, that would be one thing. But it's the way it's being, if it starts quote unquote talking, or me talking to it and then it interacting back, it's kind of starting to play on this inherent relational component we have that I think I'm inclined to think as humans, we're susceptible to be duped into thinking something is human or sentient when it's not. And so it kind of depends on how we use it. I think that being able to use the information and get access to the information so that I can use it well, that's great. If it now starts to become something that I think I'm interacting with in a relational way, I think that's very dangerous.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Jeff Zweerink is my guest. So, Jeff, if you ask AI a question, does AI then take that question and keep it in a file somewhere that this question was asked and this is how we answered it? So now that becomes part of the body of knowledge that exists in AI?
So it kind of depends. That's a really good question, because it really depends on which platform you're using. I mean,
Okay.
there's multiple different large language model AI platforms. I know Gemini is the one that Google uses. ChatGPT is one of the very popular ones, but there's Grammarly and numbers of them out there. And that's actually an interesting question, is all of this stuff that we're querying, does it get saved somewhere?
Yeah.
I go have a conversation with my wife. We have a conversation. It obviously now gets incorporated into future conversations we have, but there's no long-standing record that could be used as some sort of authoritative transcript or legal document. But it's entirely possible that the companies that are running these are actually just recording all of that data and putting it down there. So there's an interesting legal aspect of that I don't know what to do. But I do know this, that each one of these AI platforms trains its AIs in different ways. And so it could be that some of the new information that comes in, that it's actually being trained on that. Others, it could be where it's already trained and it's just responding in kind. And so what the responses you give and the queries you ask don't actually impact the training, as you will. It becomes more of the dynamic conversation. And I use that term very hesitantly, because I don't think we're actually having conversations with AI.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not just a one answer thing.
Yeah. Jeff, obviously we're not looking and we're not trusting machines to guide us with ethics or salvation or anything like that. But having said that, if I remember Billy Graham preached a message in 1968 and I heard about that, and I go to the library and I try to find out how I can get information about that message in 1968 at a crusade in Oklahoma. I'm just making all this up.
Right.
Or I can go to AI and say, what did he preach that night? Boom, there it is.
Yeah, and that's where, I'm old enough to remember to figure out where something was in a book. You had to go to the library and look through the card catalog and hope you could find it. Now you can just say, what book was this published in, and you can get it pretty quick. And I think AI does that even better. And I think that's just a phenomenal tool to use in being able to do that. The big question in my mind, and one thing that I have recognized, is that as I was growing up, that information was kind of hard to find, but the information you found was reliable. Now, information is very easy to find, but it's much harder to know whether it's reliable. And I'll give you a specific instance of this. There was, I work for an organization called Reasons to Believe. I write a number of articles, and there was an article I wrote about when did Earth's atmosphere clear? And I argued it was about 2 billion years ago, based on a paper that I was reading. And so I could go into Google, type in, when did Earth's atmosphere become transparent? And it would give me that summary up at the top, and it would say, here's what's going on. And it was a very authoritative answer. And what I eventually recognized is that it was actually the main source of information it was drawing on was this article I had written a number of years ago. Now, I think I did a good job writing the article, but what it does amount to is that one person who's writing somewhere could actually be whether unless you knew who I was and the organization I worked for and had some sort of sense of the credibility, if you just said, "Oh, the AI said this, therefore it's good information," you could very easily be misled by people who are trying to manipulate that. And it just when I recognized that stuff that I had written, because there wasn't actually a scientific answer to it, and I was kind of extrapolating some information that again, I think it was a good argument, but just because you can find any information easily, I think it's more incumbent to make sure that the information we get is actually good, because there's a lot of people out there with an agenda writing stuff on the web, and that's where most of that training data comes from.
Mm-hmm. We're going to take a little break. Dr. Jeff Zweerink is my guest. You can learn more about him at Reasons to Believe. We're going to be back in just a minute. If you have a question about anything we've spoken of so far, we're talking about artificial intelligence, faith in the age of technology. You can text it over 877-933-2484. We'll be right back.
Bill needs a minute. He needs a minute. Bill needs a minute. He'll be right back. Bill needs a minute. He needs a minute. Bill needs a minute. He'll be right back. You don't need to know why Bill needs a minute. None of your business. He'll be right back. You look in the studio, but Bill isn't in it, 'cause Bill took a minute. He'll be right back.
Hi, podcast listener. I'm Bill Arnold, and my theme song says, "What's for dinner?" And like when I'm grilling, I'm paying really close attention. And I know that ideal second to get the food off the grill. Like all good and ideal timings in life, right now would be an ideal time to be a cheerful giver to Faith Radio. Give now to support this podcast so that more people in more places might come to saving faith in Jesus and grow in their relationship and become a fully devoted follower. Click the link in the show notes or give now at myfaithradio.com. Thanks for joining today. Dr. Jeff Zweerink is my guest. What a fun last name to say. Senior research scholar at Reasons to Believe. We're talking about AI today, and AI and how it pertains to faith. We have a lot of people listening today, Jeff, that have very strong opinions about this, which I find fascinating, of course. And let's talk a little bit about, first of all, how unique humans are and why machines can mimic intelligence, but certainly not replace God's image bearers.
No, I think that's probably one of the most foundational points as Christians that we need to remember is that AI does a lot of things, and in fact, it does some things that humans do very well, but they're just not doing it they're not human in the way they do it. And I'll give an example. So one of the reasons why people tried to build computers that could outplay the best human chess players was just the recognition that playing chess required so many different cognitive abilities. It was something that uniquely humans did, that if we could find a way to do that, surely that would be intelligent. And so they spent decades working at developing the computers. There was hardware that needed to be built so that the software could run. They spent an intense amount of effort building the software. In 1996, when Deep Blue played Garry Kasparov, it actually lost 4-2. But it was kind of at least in the game there. And then in 1997, it finally beat Garry Kasparov, and promptly the next day they disassembled it. Now that tells you something very profound. It's like the computer, when it finally beat Garry Kasparov, it didn't rejoice. It didn't go out for a celebration. It didn't do anything, because it was just doing something very different than what humans do. And that's, I think, particularly important to remember when we're dealing and interacting with these large language models, is that, it looks like they're having a conversation. They're these large language models are generating words. They're responding to my prompt. They're interacting. It seems very relational, but at the end of the day, it's doing something very different than I am. So, for example, what is it doing? Well, when I'm talking, I'm thinking of concepts and ideas in my mind, and then I am putting those ideas into words, trying to put them into articulate words that will help convey the meaning. I say those words, talking to you, you hear the words, you think, oh, those words have a meaning. You in your mind interpret those words and figure out what the meaning is. You think about them, you respond to them. That's what we do when we're having a conversation. When I'm interacting with an AI, something very different is going on. And I'll illustrate what's going on is that I am typing words onto my keyboard or saying words into my microphone. Those are getting translated into zeros and ones. Now, those zeros and ones are being interacted with by the AI, but the AI is not thinking, okay, what are the words, the ideas here? Really, it's going through this big, elaborate input-output machine, which has millions, maybe billions, maybe trillions of weights where it goes through and says, okay, given this combination, this is the right output. And the cool part about these AIs is that if it get an output, you can actually feed back in and say, no, that's not right. And it'll adjust the inputs and the outputs so that the next time it'll give a different input and output. But it's not thinking about the words, trying to understand the meaning. In fact, the AI would not be able to do any of this were it not for the extensive, incredible amount of written material that's out on the web, in the books, that sort of stuff. Take all that away, and the AI doesn't have any of this capacity. In fact, all it's really doing is saying, given all of the different resources that are being fed in to be trained, it's just saying, given this string of ones and zeros, this is the proper string of ones and zeros to send out. And it's not even really thinking about it. It's just processing, if you will. So it's doing something very different than you and I are doing when we converse. And I think that's really important to remember, because when you remember that, it makes it easier to avoid the mistake of thinking it's relational, when in reality, it's just accumulating information and it's just information processing.
Jeff, I have a question. I'm curious, is there a possibility that it could ever become conscious? Or does consciousness or a living being only come from God?
I would make the argument that consciousness or a living being only comes from God. Now, I will put a caveat on that statement that we are created in God's image. And in that's a discussion far longer than I could even begin to articulate and get into today. But at least, that we are created for relationship with God. We have a capacity for social interactions with others. We can create art and music. There's a whole slew of things that come out of that. And what I don't know a final answer is, has God created us with the capacity to create life like that? I'm inclined to think no, but I know other Christians who look at that and say, well, maybe, maybe. And so I think that's an open question. But as I've looked and thought about that, one of the things that I find telling is that a lot of the stuff I do, you could replicate, because a lot of the stuff I do has a thought process, or I'll put it in more computer terms, has an algorithm to it. And if I could give an illustration, when I was in graduate school, one of the jobs I had, or one of the things I wanted to do, was we took a bunch of data every night. It got done, kind of early in the morning. There was a log that people typed in a bunch of information into, and that log gave all of the information on how to, which runs were associated with which calibration runs, which runs were looking at the source and looking off the source, and it told you how to analyze and how all the runs fit together. Now, I could take a look at this log and just almost instantaneously tell you which runs went with what, which was the proper calibration. But in order to get my computer program so that it could run and analyze all of this before I got into work, I actually had to teach a computer program how to read this log file. And what was fascinating is that it took me the better part of a day to figure it out because I had to actually sit through there and I kind of intuitively just looked at it and got it. And it turns out that there's an algorithm I was using. And it took me a long time to figure out what the actual steps of the algorithm I was using were in my brain. And so I finally figured that out, was able to write the program to do it. Now, I could now write a program that could do the same thing I could do. I could look at the file and extract this set of information out of it. What I recognized in there is that everything I do has an algorithm to it. But nothing I do is just an algorithm. And I think that's the key point in addressing will it ever become sentient? What we're doing is we're adding more algorithms to the way computers process information. But being human or being made in God's image is not just an algorithm. So we can repeatedly and more extensively replicate the algorithms we use to do stuff, but I can add all the algorithms I want, and I'm not going to make it sentient. In the same way, you can discern every algorithm I use, but that doesn't mean you've gotten to the heart of my sentience or my consciousness. And I think that's what distinguishes the machines that we're building and programming, as elegant and as fancy and as sophisticated as they are. They're just a bunch of algorithms. And humans, I may be a bunch of algorithms, but I'm inherently something more. And I don't think we have any clue. Even if it were possible, I don't think we have any clue what to take with that and put it into a computer. And so the fact that it does a lot of stuff that we think is human, we just tend to anthropomorphize and say, oh, yeah, it's clearly human because it's doing the things we can. And I think that's a pitfall that as Christians, I think we need to be particularly careful to avoid.
Jeff, let's talk about moral discernment. Now, as Christians, we want to look at the new technologies and we want to do it with caution, but we also want to understand how they can be useful.
Yes, and I will just be perfectly candid straight up front. I've kind of had a love-hate relationship with AI.
Okay.
Because at one hand, I look and see what it can accomplish and the things that it would help me do better, the things that it would help me do that I'm not currently capable of doing, I could actually use AI to do. There are so many fascinating things that it would enable me to do. And at the same time, I'm a little concerned that if I do or by doing those, am I going to be robbing myself of what God has designed for me? And I've come to think of this, actually, I think Christianity has the right way to think about this, because one of the things that I've read through Genesis numerous times, and one thing that struck me more recently as I was reading through is that God created Adam and Eve, created the heavens and the earth, and created the earth, and put Adam and Eve in the garden. But in Genesis 1 there it says, and so God had created them. It says that God blessed them and said, "Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth, rule over it, and subdue it." And I've often looked at that as a task or a command to carry out. We're supposed to go do this. But I never caught and God blessed them and said, that God gave us the blessing of being fruitful and multiplying and fill the earth and ruling over and subduing it. And so the question I ask, and I think a lot about in terms of using AI, is AI helping me do the things that God has blessed me and blessed humanity with doing, or is the AI detracting from that? Because notice, God put Adam in the garden, and the first thing he did is said, go name all the animals. Now, Adam could have just said in there, hey, ChatGPT, what are the names of, come up with good names for all these animals. But what would have been missed in there is that God had prepared this work for Adam, and his work in doing it, not only was he giving the names, but he was learning about all the animals, and he was seeing how they come in pairs, and there are ferocious animals, and there are tame animals, and there are majestic animals, and there are skittish animals. that he was learning about God's creation in a way that would help him rule over it and subdue it well. And so if Adam had done something where he short-circuited the work God had put before him, he would not be able to rule over and subdue well. Similarly, I could see Adam and Eve sitting there talking, and they get into some sort of disagreement. Not that there's a right or wrong, because this is pre-sin, so they're not sinful in doing that. But it's just hard to have a relationship with somebody who thinks differently than you. And so Adam could say, "Hey, I'm going to interact with ChatGPT because ChatGPT always seems to get me." Again, that would be a place where using the technology would short circuit the blessing of having the relationships that are inherent in being able to be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. So the question I always ask in this is, am I using this in a way that helps me accomplish what God has set before me? Or am I doing this to short circuit what God has set before me? And if I'm doing the latter, I'm inevitably going to cause pain and frustration and damage, whether it be to me or those around me. And so I think Christianity has just a great way to think about this, because there are tasks that God's put before us, there are relationships God's put before us, and how can we use AI in a way that facilitates that in the same way we use other technologies to facilitate relationships? Or are we going to do it in ways that damage the relationships?
Boy, Jeff, I asked you a question on moral discernment, and you gave me a great answer. That was really, really well done. I'm going to take a little break. Dr. Jeff Zweerink is with me. He is a research scholar at Reasons to Believe. We're talking about AI, and it's kind of an interesting topic to many. And if you've got a question or comment, you can send it over at 877-933-2484. We'll be right back. Welcome to the show. If you just climbed in your car, hope you've had a great day at work or wherever you were doing. I've got Dr. Jeff Zweerink as my guest. He's a senior research scholar at Reasons to Believe. He's an astrophysicist. And we're talking about AI today. And, I don't want to be a master of the obvious here, Jeff, but we got to keep our identity rooted in Christ and not in what technology can do. But let's talk about how we go about faith in a very technological savvy and digital world.
Yeah, like as I mentioned earlier in the show, I kind of have a little bit of a love-hate relationship, and it just in part because I think I have gotten to see in the last few years as I've been an adult, I've been able to see some of the ways that I think technology has caused a lot of damage at very minimum, just because we were unaware or we weren't paying attention to what was going on. I think, we're beginning to see, as so many people have cell phones and as we're introducing cell phones at younger ages with all the social media, that there's kind of a lot of damage that has gone there. And that's where I think AI, for as powerful as a tool as social media and cell phones were, I think AI's it's even more powerful. And that's good because it will allow us to accomplish a lot, but it's also particularly dangerous because it hits right at that place where we are inherently relational, and AIs are looking more relational. And I think of Jesus as he's commanding his disciples. He'd trained them, he taught them, they'd been learning from him. But he also then sent them out and said, "Hey, I'm going to send you out to go tell people." And as it says there in Matthew 10, "Behold, I send you out as sheep in the midst of the wolves. So be shrewd as serpents and innocent as doves." And I think that is a great mindset for how to think about: are we using AI? Are we using it? We're recognizing that there are, as the Bible says, that the Satan is a roaring lion, seeking who he can devour. Are we doing things that keep our identity and who we are grounded in Christ? Or are we allowing the technology to draw us away to something else? And then I just see in Scripture there, like I said, there's just a richness about Scripture that the older I get, the more I see. And I look back at what was going on there in the garden, that God had prepared this idyllic place for Adam and Eve. There was, if there was a better place to live on earth, you couldn't find one, that God had planted this, prepared it for Adam and Eve. And even in the midst of that, all God said is, don't eat of that one tree. And here are Adam and Eve with the best of environments, tempted by the serpent. What did they quickly do? Ooh, that looks good for food, and it's going to be really neat, and it'll make me wise. It's like they chose to seek what God had designed them to look to Him for. They chose to look somewhere else for that. And I just see the allure of AI being, it's not that it will set itself up as God, but because of its interactive nature, it kind of has this relational, almost like it's a person or a sentience in the way it interacts, and our inclination to see that desire for relationship, because we're made in God's image, we're inherently relational. We are pretty susceptible to look and say, oh, that would be cool, instead of asking, okay, God, how would you have me do that? Contrast that with Jesus in the garden there, or not Jesus in the garden, but Jesus being tempted out in the wilderness. Satan came and tempted Jesus with those same things. Look at this food, isn't it good? Throw yourself down from the pinnacle. It'll be a spectacle. People will see you. I'll give you power. I'll allow you to rule. In every instance there, Jesus, where Adam and Eve went toward the fruit and engaged that, every moment Jesus went and said, but this is what the Father said. But this is what the Father said. But this is what the Father said. And so as Christians, if we're grounded and our identity is rooted in Christ, we're going to be doing what Christ did and always asking, is this, cool, shiny fruit? Or, hey, Father, what do you want me to do here? And I just think Christianity has the most robust framework for being able to use these new technologies, but use them in a way that honors and glorifies God instead of becoming idols in and of themselves.
Mm-hmm. Jeff, you made a comment about Satan's like a roaring lion, and of course he is. But when I think of AI that can take your picture and your voice and put them together in a video, a comment came in about how dangerous that can be, where you can prey on older, vulnerable people that think they're getting a message from someone that they know and love when in fact they're not.
No, and I expect that's going to be done, because when we develop the capacity to alter pictures, we now don't look at a picture and say, "Oh, I can trust that." We say, "Is that photoshopped or not?"
Yeah, exactly. Was that AI generated?
Yeah, we get an email, and is that really my friend, or is that a spam email? It's like there's this. We've kind of. My sense is those happened somewhat slowly enough that we could learn and adapt to them. But I tell you, if I get a call on my phone and it's one of my kids, I'm going to take it and I'm going to assume it's them, because to do otherwise is really, damn it, that's going to do damage to our relationship. You get an AI that can fake my kids.
Yeah.
I've got a real problem there. I got to figure out how to navigate that.
Mm-hmm. So true. All right. Let's talk about AI in terms of where does it shine and where does it, where can we celebrate it? Maybe even outside of faith, when it comes to something like a radiologist reading a scan, they will miss stuff, but not necessarily AI.
No, I think that's a great point, is that, you get a scan, an X-ray, CT scan, whatever it is, the doctor's got to read that. And what the doctor is looking for is there are signs on those scans that are indicative of problems, of pathologies. Mm-hmm. And AIs are great at recognizing patterns. So I could very easily imagine, I don't know whether it's done yet or not, but you could just say there is one AI that looks at every X-ray that's ever out there, looking for broken bones or cancerous tumors or whatever you want to look for. And it's just the more data it sees, the more examples it sees, the more it's going to recognize subtle. Oh, that's not really anything. Oh, that thing that's very similar but just a little different, that's actually a bad cancer. It could just do that, and you could say, all right, every scan just gets run through this, and it never gets tired. It never has a bad day. It never needs a break. It just runs and it does it right, and it gets better and better and better. And I mean, I love doctors because I think they just do a phenomenal job, but they are humans, and God's put us in these bodies that we need rest, we need sleep. We get tired, we get frustrated, we get irritated, and AIs don't have any of that. So I think, looking for diseases, I think there's going to be great things that work there. Just in the sciences, you can use AIs to build better drugs that will help us be able to care for people who have medical diseases, to maybe fight cancers or to alleviate pain less addictively. I mean, scientists are already looking and seeking to use AIs to develop these things. So I think it's got great potential, and it's already done some really good things as of today.
Yeah, I agree. Dr. Jeff Zweerink is my guest. He's a senior research scholar at Reasons to Believe. We're going to take a break and be right back as we continue our conversation about artificial intelligence, faith in the age of technology.
Psst, have you heard the news? Listening just got better with the new and improved Faith Radio app. No more restrictions, no more static, no more missing your favorite shows. Now, listen when you want, where you want, and share with everyone. When you need hope, encouragement, Jesus, it's right there on your phone. Text the word app to 877-933-2484 and follow the link or search Faith Radio Network in your app store.
I'm talking about artificial intelligence with Dr. Jeff Zweerink. Comment that came in, Jeff, on the text line. So many people say they don't know what is true anymore and they give up. They often blame it on AI. And they talk about systems that succeed by convincing people of ideology. They succeed by destroying people's ability to think at all. Are we creating an environment where lying can become so constant that ordinary people stop caring what is true?
I think that's a very, very real concern. And again, what I would say is I think Christianity has a very robust way of thinking about this. And, we've alluded to this a number of times through here, but at the end, one of the things that is true is that Christianity serves a triune God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, that in God's very essence, he is relational. And that's part of us being made in his image, is that we are relational. And I just found as I was kind of working on developing a manuscript about AI, I ran across a study done at the University of Harvard. It started back in the 1938. It was actually 238 sophomores. At the time, it was an all men's school, and so it was 238 men. But it's expanded. The study's still ongoing now, just shy of 90 years later. And it's got their offspring. It's included inner city kids. So it's got, or any city residents. So it's got a much wider demographic than just its original. But among the things that have come out of there, and there's been 4 different directors of the study, but one of the things that they have found is that relationships are key to our health. And it's not just as you have better relationships, you just like life better. It actually shows that when they look at people who've lived into their 80s and 90s, they ask, what are the factors that have allowed them to live healthily? And it turns out that it's not the amount of cholesterol, how much they exercised. It turns out that it's their relationships. In fact, one of the guy named Robert Waldinger, who was one of the directors, he made this statement: when we gathered together everything we knew about them, the people that lived to 90 years old, at age 50, it wasn't their middle-age cholesterol levels that predicted how they were going to grow old. It was how satisfied they were in their relationships. People who were the most satisfied in their relationships at age 50 were the healthiest at age 80. Loneliness kills. It's as powerful as smoking or alcoholism. And I think what it does just say, and both of the directors, when we began the study, nobody cared about empathy or attachment. But the key to healthy aging is relationships, relationships, relationships. And so I do think there's going to be just an incredible proliferation of wrong information, lies, agenda driven. I could imagine a society where it's just almost everything is overwhelmingly ads all the time, which are all about driving me to do stuff. But in that environment, the place where, as Christians especially, we can be a great light to the world is to build good relationships, primarily have a good relationship with God through his son Jesus and his life, death, and resurrection, that we can enjoy that relationship and grow deeper in it, but also in living out that relationship and the people that are around us. And that is the greatest antidote to all of the perils that AI brings, is those healthy relationships, I think. And so again, I think Christianity just has so much to say about this. And we're going to get a chance as Christians, good, bad, or other, to show that what Christianity says really is the truth. And that will be a great lighthouse that will draw people to the truth of Christianity.
Mm-hmm. Boy, Jeff, what a great point. I mean, we are built for community. We're built for one another. And I think as we look at how the first century churches started, everything was done for for the edification of one another. There was community. And then I don't know if we're as good today as they were back then, but I hope we are.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are things about the technology. I mean, I live roughly 1,800 miles away from my parents, but I can pick up a phone and call them and have good conversations with them. Go back a couple, 300 years, and I may get to see them once or twice in my life. And so
Right.
The technology allows relationship. It's a technology. I could use a phone to avoid the relationships that are in front of me, or I could use the phone to build the relationships in front of me and the important relationships that I can't meet face to face.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what I think is true about AI. I mean, I mentioned in the previous segment that we use AI to develop drugs, but we can use the AI to comb through the literature and say, hey, these chemical combinations might do what we're looking for, and we can build that. That same AI that is capable of building a better drug that helps us care for people, you toggle one flag and get rid of, instead of making it low toxicity, make it high toxicity, and you can use it to develop chemical weapons. So it's the same tool can be used for great good. The power that it has to do great good is the same power that it has to do great bad. The key thing in there is, who are the people who are using it? Are we going to be people of character? Are we going to be people who build good relationships, who care about others, who want to take care of this creation that God has given us to steward? If we do that, that will point people to God. And that's ultimately what our goal in life is to glorify God and enjoy him forever.
Mm-hmm. Jeff, if we use AI, is it truly searching all of the internet, or does it have a bias towards the question that was asked, and I'm going to steer you into this direction, into this camp? Is it going to make selections on my behalf?
Almost certainly it does.
Okay.
That it has a bias to it. So I have this suspicion right now people are working really hard at keeping biases out, because if the users detect the bias and they don't like it, they're going to quit using it. And you're trying to get people to use it more and more. But as I'm naive to think that people don't have an agenda and want to introduce a
Right.
bias and influence elections. And, there's all of these sorts of things. There's research that shows, even given the technology we have now, we can do. So I'm hard pressed to think that's not going to happen. And so I think Jesus' admonition to his disciples, be shrewd as serpents, but innocent as doves, that in that sense, the human world is very dangerous. Be well prepared, be really connected to God and know his spirit and be intimate there, because that is the Spirit directs us and will help us give us discernment there. That's one of the fruits of the Spirit is discernment there. And so
Yeah.
I think Christianity is very robust there.
Yeah, it's a perfect wrap for the conversation. Jeff, thank you so much for that. Those words of wisdom right at the end. Stay close to Christ. That is the key. Thank you once again for all you brought to the show today, and thank you for being a guest.
Really enjoyed our conversation. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you so much. Dr. Jeff Zweerink has been my guest. He's at Reasons to Believe. You can check him out at reasonstobelieve.org. That's the show we have for today. I am looking forward to tomorrow to be with you. I hope you have a wonderful night. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for supporting Faith Radio and listening to my show. And just know that I care about you, and I pray that God will meet all your needs according to the glorious riches in Christ Jesus. Have a great night. I'll see you tomorrow. Thanks for listening. Programming like this is made available through your support. Information available at myfaithradio.com.